And Audacity in 3, 2, and 1. All right. Welcome back to the Barbell Lifestyle Podcast. And today we have another very special guest. And I'm super excited to introduce not only a really awesome expert in the field on women's health, but a badass coach. And also, I get to selfishly say a friend of mine and a friend of ours, Alycia Israel. So welcome to the Barbell Lifestyle Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, girl.
Yeah. All right. So I don't think I could tell your story as well as you. So I would love for you to just kind of start us out by giving our audience a background on like kind of just your story and journey with coaching. If you can give the 60-second elevator pitch for that and kind of how you got your roots in the industry and then in women's health specifically.
Yeah, 100%. So my journey started probably back in 2009 when I became a personal trainer. I was always really obsessed with women being strong and learning to be strong. And so the strength world really pulled at my heart. And so I dove in, became a personal trainer. And this was in college. And I started doing what a lot of us do, powerlifting, bodybuilding, all these different competitions, which over the course of time, just completely wreaked havoc on my hormonal and metabolic health. And so I was kind of forced to really learn about how that impacts women on a very, very extreme level, which taught me deeper on the ins and outs of the hormonal process, deeper physiology, because I was forced into it, right? By extreme dieting, extreme training. And so I saw the vast array of all the hormone issues. I've literally had everything you could possibly have over the course of the last 10, 12 years. So wow. That piece of it, while also being a coach and moving into the online space and building my business, I really learned that not only through my own hormonal journeys, which I'm happy to dive into deeper, like which one do you want to hear? But I also learned that wow, I'm not the only one dealing with this. A lot of women are struggling with hormone issues, self-induced potentially from bodybuilding and powerlifting, but also not, right? And PCOS is a really good example of that, which we can definitely dive into. But a lot of women are coming across hormonal issues. And when we're working with them as clients, like in my online coaching business, I realized really early on that like calories in, calories out, eating less, moving more is not working. What the heck? Like it didn't work with me. It's not working with them. Like what is the missing piece here? Like if they want to lose body fat, like why is just a caloric deficit like not working? And you really start to realize like, oh, like the hormonal piece is huge. So we need to focus that because women deserve that. They don't deserve to be told just to eat less and be dismissed in their doctor's office or be dismissed by a coach and make it, oh, you're just not tracking or you're just not being compliant. No, it's deeper than that for a lot of women. And so I got to see it firsthand. I went through it myself. And then through my coaching business, realizing that, man, some women just aren't getting results with what we were taught in school. Because I got my master's degree in exercise physiology and sports nutrition. I have 17 fucking certifications. Like, but none of those taught me anything about hormonal health, menstrual cycle health, truly like the woman's experience until I actually experienced it myself and had to fucking figure it out. Right. And so therefore, I just had this mission to help other women overcome that too, because we're not being heard. So that's not 60 seconds, but in a nutshell, there you go, I guess.
That's pretty good. We have a lot of guests on our show, and sometimes that first question takes us 15 minutes. So I think you nailed it. I want to go
give me 2 minutes.
I want to go on a short little tangent here because of like how passionate you are about empowering women and your business, the AB Barbells. I want to just hear a little bit of background around your slogan, "Be Your Own Daddy," because I feel like people don't know you until they know like your slogan and what you're all about, and you can hear it in your voice. But just kind of background in like how you empower women and why you choose to do that.
Yeah, it really started from an early age. I grew up with a lot of trauma in home. My dad was very abusive, very enraged. He was also a con man. He's still in prison. That was really fun. If you want to hear that whole story, feel free to visit my podcast, conveniently called Be Your Own Daddy. But it stemmed from that, like not feeling that I was in control of my life, that I didn't feel like I had a voice, that I had strength. And so after that whole experience at home, and he finally went to prison, I really felt like I was able to come into myself. And that's when I got into strength training, and all of that. And so I'm very passionate about women not only being strong from within, but also being financially independent. I don't care. Do you care if I swear in this podcast, or is that going to offend
It's
anybody?
too late, and no.
Okay. I said
way
fuck
too
twice.
late for that.
So if anything about me is that I don't give a fuck. Like, this is the way that I talk. But regardless, I really believe that women deserve to have choices and have freedom, and that comes with making money, period, hard stop. But it also comes with your health. And so it really stems from my upbringing, and I just want women to feel empowered, and just that they can live the life, whatever that is, whatever they want, they can have that. They don't have to ask permission. They don't have to be dismissed. Their experiences are always valid. And so when I built my business, I didn't want it just to be a fat loss program. I didn't, because that's also too, that's fine. It's fine if you want to lose body fat. Let's just first say that as a woman, you can do whatever the hell you want with your body. There's no shame in your goal. But ultimately, I wanted every woman that came through my company to get a comprehensive experience, right? I want them to get the nutrition and training help that they need from that perspective, but also the metabolic and hormonal side of it too. But the mindset piece, the abundance, the deserving of that type of messaging versus the scarcity versus the asking for permission. How about let's stop that? And if you want something, you can get it, and no one has to tell you you're allowed. You can just do it. And so having that type of messaging along with my program, so they leave feeling like, wow, this is way more than I ever thought it was going to be. And that at the end of the day, I'm responsible for my life, and I can take full ownership of that. And that's really exciting. And that's what I think really what Be Your Own Daddy is just living the life that you want to live and not asking permission for it.
Love it. I just got chills, and I don't know if that's because I'm drinking a really cold smoothie or because of what you said, probably because of what you said. I love it. But no, I appreciate you sharing all that with us. And, I know the first time you told me that whole story, like in depth, I was like, wow, that is really crazy powerful. So I knew when we had you on, I wanted to ask you that question as well. So awesome. But yeah, let's get into the hormones, because I've got a lot of questions and I want to learn a lot from you with this opportunity. So, I mean, I know a lot of the things that come up are lately are things like PCOS, Hashimoto's, thyroid issues, all this stuff that we're seeing. Like you said, the calories in, calories out isn't working. Why is that? What's actually happening under the hood, per se? And yeah, I guess we could start with PCOS and go into, I mean, I guess just like, where do these things come from in the first place? Like, because I know that birth control has been under the microscope lately. Maybe we just start there. Where do these things come from, and kind of what's the root of all these hormonal issues cropping up?
Yeah, that's a great question, because ultimately there's a million answers, right? And I think the biggest one that actually hasn't been unturned is the trauma and stress piece that a lot of women experience through childhood, through adolescence, and also as an adult, that we tend to overlook the things we've gone through in our lives. Like, I'll sit here and say, like, the trauma that I experienced as a kid with my abusive father absolutely has a role in how powerlifting and bodybuilding affected my body. My body couldn't handle it for a reason. And I think because it was already so stressed and fight or flight, nervous system like dysfunction, adrenal dysfunction, always looking for a threat. Like, that's how my body has survived. Yeah. And you throw bodybuilding and powerlifting on top of that. No wonder I have hypothyroidism. No wonder I had all these issues, adrenal issues, thyroid, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, like every single hormone, insulin. I still have insulin issues. All of that doesn't just happen from like one instance, like one thing, right? It's a culmination of the thing. So I think we really have to go back and look at like our lives as kids. Like, I really do. I really think it starts there. And ultimately our environment, whether it is the people around us, for sure, the stress, but also just how we grew up from like a toxicity level, like just in general. How many of us grew up with air fresheners in every single room that we breathed in for 20 years? That type of thing. So I feel like it's a combination, or birth control, being put on birth control when you're 14 years old because you're having acne and an irregular period, which is normal when they start. You know what I'm saying? So I feel like we were thrown so much on top of just the normal, like normal in quotations, of someone's life in general, the ebbs and flows, and God forbid, extreme traumatic experiences. That truly, is where I feel like a lot of it comes from. Sure, genetics play a role in family history, but especially with things like PCOS, where they say, I don't know where it comes from. I'm like, well, that's probably because it comes from a mix of things. And a lot of it has to do with things we can't necessarily test for, like trauma, stress, chronic birth control use, things of those nature. So I feel like it starts from there, truly.
Yeah, well, I feel like it's all, everything you just listed is an input into the body, whether that is smelling air freshener chemicals or a more psychological input of trauma or stress, chronic or acute, right? Big traumatic life events, things that culminate over time, what we put into our body consistently over time. And then it's like also I've kind of developed a thought that it's also about like the balance of like the negative stressors that are added in versus the positive things that we're adding in, right? And it's like, if that balance is just so uneven and that seesaw is like all the way in one direction, then of course these things are going to show up, right? And so the way that we eliminate or reduce or, improve our quality of life is we add more positive habits, behaviors, getting sunlight, exercising, healthy foods, like eliminating toxins, managing our stress, and going to therapy and all these things. I feel like that's what like stacks the books in our favor and then evens out that seesaw. And that's kind of like what I've realized is because it's never one thing. It's never like I did this and it was solved. And it's really hard to look at it that way because especially when we're looking at a condition like a PCOS diagnosis or a Hashimoto's diagnosis, it's like, or thyroid, right? It's like your blank hormone is out of whack. It's like, oh, well, if I just fix that one thing, then I'll be better. And so we look at it from that lens, but it's not exactly that way. Would you say that that's accurate, or am I missing something there?
Absolutely. No, you're right. It's not just throwing a supplement on it. Like, oh, I have PCOS, take saw palmetto. It's like, no, like, I mean, there's things we can do to help with different like diagnosed conditions, right? But ultimately it's stemming down to the root cause of why those occurred in the first place. And that's where it gets tricky. You have to do a lot of digging. And I really love how you mentioned therapy. That's a huge part of someone's healing, even if you think it's getting in this box of hormones, like physiological science, like supplements, medications. We get caught in that bubble. But I love how you mentioned sunlight, therapy, like even going on walks, like actually like doing things that make you happy throughout the day. And we get so caught in this busy cycle, especially for women, because we're taught and praised to do it all. And which leads to, I actually created another episode on this in my podcast, but it leads to overfunctioning. So you're taught that you're supposed to, as a woman, be able to be this amazing mother, have this career, this wife that's perfect. And all these expectations are laid on you and you overfunction for a long time, which leads other people around you to underfunction because you're overfunctioning. And so you end up doing more and more and more and getting to this place of burnout, resentment, frustration, and you have no space left for yourself. And it's a form of self-betrayal. So tell me, like, what does that actually do for like your hormonal function in your body, your dopamine, your serotonin? It's depleted. You have nothing left because you're giving everything to everybody else. And so you lead this life of selflessness in quotations, but you're not being selfless. You're just, the only one you're betraying is yourself. And So ultimately it's this spiral of, we need to stop praising women for doing everything, because they don't have to do everything to be good enough. And that taking care of yourself paired with the proper like medical side of it, if you need that, or the homeopathic functional approach, if that's what you need, all wrapped into one with great nutrition and, exercising and just moving is really what people need. But a lot of women are forgetting, like, you need space for that. Like, you need space for that. A supplement is not going to fix that shit if you are constantly over functioning.
Your inability to say no is preventing you from actually being able to fix the problem, because we're always like, yes, I'll do that for you. Definitely spoke to me on a personal level there too.
Marissa, I could see you, like, as Alycia was talking, you're just like, I could just see you like, yep, this resonates. But one of the things that I'm sure that Alycia, that you run into as well, is like, because I feel like we have a lot of the same, like, similar clients who are like high functioning women. And so I'm curious, like, too, because we see this within our clients. It's like we have these high functioning women, and they come into a program and we tell them to slow down. We tell them, hey, let's go on walks, like, let's focus on water, let's get more sleep. And sometimes they're kind of like, shouldn't it be harder? Shouldn't I be doing more? And so that's really difficult, trying to be like, no, like, let's do less. And it goes against everything that we've been taught. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that too.
You're right, because it served them up until this point. So it's like an unlearning, right? Like, both of you, I'm sure, like, it's served you to fucking go and put the gas on. Am I right?
Duh.
Yeah.
Of course.
You know me.
Marissa's like, yeah, I'm a bad bitch. So, and there's honestly, it's a blend, right? There's nothing wrong with going for it and working hard and being proud of what you do, and being the person that people know of is like, they can fucking get it. Like, they get after it, right? It's powerful. It's to be that person. But at the same time, I think it's the difference between, and we can do this with clients too, like, it's the difference between, you can be a bad bitch, but not at the expense of yourself. That is not what being a daddy is. That's not what being like a bad bitch is. You're betraying yourself. So you have to find that boundary of like, you can, be a hard ass worker and reach your goals and make that money, like, get that goal physique, if you're not betraying yourself, right? So where's that boundary for you ultimately?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And a lot of times pouring back into yourself, from what I'm learning now in my own journey, is that when you pour back into yourself, for example, in your health, your fitness, like taking care of you internally, it's like, it actually expands your capacity for everything else, rather than taking away for it.
1,000%.
Yeah.
I love
Good
that.
stuff.
Capacity is a great word.
Yeah. Because we think we only have this like limited amount of bandwidth. So it's like, well, I can't focus on my health and fitness or my hormones or this because I am too spread thin. But the solution is actually putting time and energy back into that, saying no to other things. And then you're actually capable of handling more as a result, because you're functioning better and clearer, and you are able to continue saying no to things that don't serve you and just focus on what matters.
Yeah, 1,000%. That's why I went to therapy. I've been in therapy like on and off throughout my whole life, but recently I started meeting with a new therapist, and I literally in the first call, I was like, girl, I just want my capacity needs to get bigger. So this is why I'm here. It was all about capacity, because we all have goals in life, right? And a lot of us, it's hard to quote unquote slow down. And it's not really slowing down when you take care of yourself, right? Because being beat down and feeling scarce, that's going to slow you down a lot faster than being abundant and making yourself a priority. But I think for the clients we have that I think we're telling, slow down as in like taking walks, making sure you're prioritizing your nutrition, the gym, like, but just not going, like, we don't need to do fucking HIIT 6 times a week. Like, that's not what we're doing here. But like switching their mindset of what is actually going to move us forward doesn't mean we have to go fast, right? Sometimes taking it in a different way is exactly what you need. And that's actually going to move you forward faster than if you were trying to, what is it? Like Orange Theory your way there, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I've actually been saying that a lot lately, is slow down to speed up. And because that's an analogy that I use for the business sense of like, we need to slow down and focus on perfecting this funnel, this system, this whatever, in order for everything else to speed up. But it feels like going backwards because we're not doing all these other things. So same with our health. It's like, it might not be speeding up in the sense that I'm going to commit to 7 days a week because that feels like I'm going to get there faster. That's actually slowing you down versus,
Absolutely.
like you said. Yeah, I love it. I do want to get into some science and some weeds here, with PCOS specifically, because I know that you've posted a lot about that and it's something I'm just very curious about. So, I mean, could you kind of start us out with like just what that is and like the mechanisms behind it and what we're kind of seeing now with PCOS?
Yeah. And I will shout out, like, my head coach on my team is fucking phenomenal. So if you want to go like epically deep, I highly recommend you chatting with her, because she's the brains behind the operation now. But with PCOS specifically, it's simply just quote unquote a hormonal disorder that just causes various dysfunction, primarily with a woman's like reproductive health, but also it rolls over into other hormonal aspects in her body, gut health, adrenals, et cetera, et cetera. But the symptoms include things like heavy periods. It could be ovarian cysts, like higher PMS symptoms, or like more severe. It could be hair growth on the body, hair loss on your head. So like there's various symptoms, but it also depends on what type you have, which a lot of women don't know. There's different types of PCOS. So polycystic ovarian syndrome is the actual, just so everyone's clear what PCOS stands for. So I think that's the missing piece behind PCOS, is that there are different ways a woman can experience it. There are different types that affect different hormonal cascades within the body. So it's really important for women to understand it's not a one size fits all. And unfortunately, when a woman's diagnosed with this, it's treated like a one size fits all in the Western med world, right? What they do usually, without really running labs, is they'll say, oh, your symptoms are weight gain. Your symptoms are you're having some stubble on your chin and some hair loss on your head. So you have PCOS, but we're not really going to test for it. But cool, that's what you have. But ultimately, too, we're just going to put you on birth control, metformin, and call it a day. And that's what you're going to see when you go to a doctor's office. If you have, unless your doctor's more functional based and super like on top of it. But unfortunately, that's not normal. That you'll see that like 10% of the time. So we get a lot of women coming through, I'm sure you have too, of women who are diagnosed with PCOS and just put on metformin and birth control. And then, which isn't great from the birth control side, because all that did was shut down her hormone production period endogenously. So she does not even have any type of ovulation, and therefore you can't even fix the root cause of the problem, because basically everything is quote unquote turned off. The communication between her ovaries and the brain are done, like not happening. So at that point, it's a Band-Aid. And so you're not really able to help them uncover the root cause and also just live normally with PCOS without all the symptoms, but you can't do that if it's turned off. So that's what we see a lot of in terms of women coming through with PCOS and what the diagnosis looks like from a Western med perspective in terms of treatment. So do you want to go kind of go into like the different types from there and kind of?
Yeah, I would love to hear
route?
that. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, and when I talk about types, I guess the one thing I should talk about PCOS. When you're probably wondering, like, how does a woman get PCOS? There is no straight answer. This is a myth that a lot of people misunderstand. Weight gain does not cause PCOS. PCOS causes weight gain. It is reversed. So trying to tell a woman that comes into a doctor's office, like, you just need to lose weight, honey. The PCOS is causing the weight gain in the first place, bitch. Like, what the like, so it's very dismissing, and it's not even helpful, because women with PCOS will have a harder time losing weight because of the PCOS diagnosis. So if you don't address the PCOS diagnosis, then the weight loss is going to be so hard to do. And again, when you address the PCOS diagnosis, weight loss does get easier, more manageable, but you have to address that first. So that goes into the different types. And when we're talking about different types, I do want to make a caveat that we label them as types to make it easy to understand, but it's not as simple as that, because women could have a few maybe blood marker variables from one type to another. They might have a combination of two types. It's not like, oh, you're insulin resistant PCOS. Oh, you're this type of PCOS. It's a little bit of a flow, and some can blend into one another. So just know this, we categorize them like this, so it's easy to understand, but there's a lot of complexity there. So it's not just black and white. But
yeah, would you say it's kind of like a gradient in a way?
Absolutely.
Like it kind of flows that. Yeah. Okay.
Right. And that's why you want to get, hormone stuff done for women with PCOS or really any hormone condition, because then you can see it. You can see exactly what's off and address that thing, versus labeling a woman as just this because of her symptoms or whatever, and then not really like knowing. And then you're just guessing at that point. So ultimately, there's 4 types. There's insulin resistance PCOS, there's adrenal PCOS, there's post-birth control PCOS, and then there's inflammatory PCOS. So the insulin resistant PCOS is the one we see the most of. This, you'll see high androgens in a woman, you'll see high fasted insulin, high blood sugar, things of this nature. And ultimately, we'll see most likely like weight gain with this one. We'll see androgens from an androgen perspective. You'll see body hair growth, hair shedding, things of that nature. So that one is the most common. But then you can go into the adrenal side of PCOS, where they will have a adrenal dysfunction. So either really high cortisol levels, really low, maybe it's tanked out. They also will have high levels of DHEA, which is leading into high androgens as well. But it's mainly coming from an adrenal stress type of place versus an insulin or a blood sugar type place. So again, like you would only see this in labs, but it can show up in like the fatigue. It could show up in the insomnia, hypothyroidism, like that type of thing. Whereas like the insulin side is just more of like the weight gain, the androgen type of response, things of that nature. Okay. So again, symptoms are a little bit different, but you really want to check blood work to see like, because there is crossover, right? They might have a mix. But then there's also post-birth control PCOS, which is like, I put quotations again, because this one should be temporary, but it's a type of PCOS that you experience when you come off of birth control that is temporary, or should be. Because when we come off of birth control, what happens is essentially we have been, while on birth control, adding in an exogenous hormone into our body for God knows how long. Some women are on it for 20 years. And you take that exogenous hormone away, we have to remember that that entire time you're on that pill, your own body's production was not happening. So when you take that exogenous piece away, your body is like, what the hell? Like, I got to wake up, and it's going to start trying to produce its own hormonal values, but sometimes it doesn't at all. That's where women run into infertility. Sometimes it does, but with a vengeance, which is called the hormonal rebound. So what could happen is you take that exogenous hormone away, estrogen, progestin, and then your own body starts making it again, but it's like with a vengeance. So instead of going back to normal levels, it goes way past what you need, and it causes a lot of shitty symptoms. And that's where we see the post-birth control PCOS, which is like you're experiencing PCOS-like symptoms, like severe cramping during your cycle, like acne, the hair loss, the fatigue, all the things. But it's because of that, and that a hormone rebound you're experiencing, which should alleviate itself over a couple months, you would hope, but sometimes it doesn't. And so your body never recalibrates to what it should be normal, because you've had this exogenous hormone, and obviously there's synthetic hormones into your body for so long. Your body's like, what the heck am I doing?
Question for you actually on that. When you say there's kind of like 2 main responses that happen when someone has the post-birth control PCOS, like my guess would be that which way it goes depends a lot on like those stressors that we were talking about earlier, of like what's the condition that the body's in and how it responds that way. Does that play a role, or is it like, what would you say influences that?
You know what? I don't even know if you know, like, I mean, we've had like, even with myself, or we've had clients too that have come off birth control. A lot of clients that come to us, like that's the goal. They're like, I want to come off birth control as best as possible and get help with like the symptoms that I might experience. And we tell them, we're like, we're going to see, we're going to find out. I do think that if you are put on birth control to like at a young age to mitigate really severe periods or irregular periods or really severe things, you're most likely going to come off of it. And those things are going to come back. Right. And that's why birth control is not a long-term fix. It's just a Band-Aid. You're going to have to address it anyway. So you might as well. Now, if someone was on birth control, maybe simply for pregnancy prevention, and they were only on it for like 2 or 3 years, they're going to come off of that and probably just fine. If they've never had any type of like cycle issues previously, they're most likely going to go back to you're going to go back to where you started most likely. But there are some people, some women who will take birth control and they're up until that point, their cycle was fine. And then they come off of birth control. They've been on it for like 5 or 7 years. They come off and all of a sudden it's a shit show. So like, you don't really know. It's kind of like Russian roulette with that.
Great. Love that.
Why do you love that? Why?
No, I mean, my experience was like, and so right now I have the copper IUD, so it's non-hormonal, but like when I came off of the hormonal after like 4 years, it was like, well, everything's about the same. Like cycles came back immediately. Like I personally had no issues. And I'm very grateful for that.
Yeah.
I was just saying like, I love that. Cause it's just like, we don't know what we're going to get.
You really don't. But also too, that's why it's great to have a coach to support you. Cause I mean, if you have a coach with you that, again, has that background, at least like when things start to happen, they'll know what to do. But also there's preventative stuff that you can do, that I recommend doing like a month before you decide to come off. We have a like list, and I can even share it with you if you want. You can put it in the show notes, but there's like a list of things that we recommend for women to do. Like, I think it's a mixture of vitamin D. There's B vitamins that are methylated specifically, so you actually absorb them, because a big piece of birth control, especially the pill, is that you over time do not absorb B vitamins very well anymore. And so you want to make sure the B vitamin you're taking is actually methylated, meaning it's going to absorb better. So we do recommend that. But then there's also different things in terms of like anti-androgen, like saw palmetto is a great one that you can take. So you can kind of like take the edge off of the androgen response you're going to have when you come off of birth control, which causes the hair loss and the acne and things like that. You can again mitigate it a little bit. There's that piece of it, but then there's also, from a supplement perspective, you can take some DIM, which could again just mitigate the estrogen rebound, which can cause like really heavy periods and just cramping and just all the things that like mood swings, things of that nature. So we have a full list. I'm sure there's a number of things on there that you could start doing actually before you come off of it to almost get your body ready for it. So then when you do come off, it's way less severe because you've already got ahead of the game, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah. Really cool. And yeah, I would love that. We could definitely put it in the show notes and have people download it if anyone's interested. That'd be dope.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I was thinking about, sorry, Alycia, I was just saying, I was thinking about our generation, right? I feel like it's like we were put on birth control from such a young age and have been on it for such a long time because it was just normal, right? Like that's whatever, that's just what everyone did. And then throwing in like, bodybuilding and like, cause I felt like that got really, really big when, 2014 through 2000, up into now. And then like, it's like all of these things. And then you see a surge of PCOS and you're like, well,
no
like,
shit.
Yeah, I know. So I'm just like, oh man, but it's, and then of course I feel like, we're older. I feel like I'm dating myself at least. And it's like our timeline is filled with people who are having infertility issues and they're having things. And so it's frustrating because it's like, man, a lot of this stuff we could have easily been prevented, or if we could have been educated a little bit more on what exactly we were doing. But it's kind of cool to be like, okay, well, we can't change the past, right? So it's like, how can we help people who are dealing with it, but then future generations, right? So like, I think that that's really cool, and try not to feel like a victim, but it's like, how can we help other people and what can we do about it now?
Yeah, 100%.
Absolutely. All right, cool. And then, oh, we're missing one part, the inflammatory PCOS.
Yeah. So inflammatory, this one tends to not, well, it is common to a degree. It's probably similar to adrenal, but this one stems more in the gut. And how many women do we know with PCOS or even just in general that have gut issues? So many. So this also begs the question of, does it start in the gut or did it start with the PCOS? So inflammatory gets a little bit tricky, but regardless, for the sake of just understanding things, there is a gut component, right? Like whenever we have a hormone condition, 9 times out of 10, there's some type of like gut issue related with it, or at least some type of connection, right? So it's really important, regardless of any type of PCOS that you have, to focus on gut health. However, if a woman has specifically inflammatory PCOS, most of her issues will reside in the gut. That's also why it's important to get testing done, because again, she might not present like the high androgen piece of PCOS or like the ovarian cyst side that some women experience or some women don't. And so a lot of doctors will write it off and just say she has IBS. So that's a problem, because then you're just giving her like just random, like, you know, either PPIs for like indigestion, or she's getting like this probiotic, or just take like some, you know, fiber supplement or some garbage, right? Without actually figuring out like, where's this inflammation coming from that's actually causing the bloating, the disruption, the bacteria, like disruption, like what is causing it? And you don't really go into that if you're just labeled as IBS, because what happens when women are labeled as IBS? Okay, cool. Just eat your veggies and we'll see you in a year. You have IBS, so you're just gonna be bloated. Like it's like, okay, like that's it. So I think from that perspective too, it's women who get diagnosed with IBS. What if they have an autoimmune condition? That could also be, it could be leading into endometriosis, you know, different things of that nature. So if it's not dug into enough, then they never get the help that they need. And we know, like, obviously as coaches, how important your gut is to everything, even mental health. Like a lot of women who have inflammatory PCOS also have they're on, you know, antidepressants and things of that nature, because then it's rolled over into, you know, how literally their brain operates, you know? So I feel like we have to really diagnose, or I shouldn't say diagnose, we're not coaches, we're not doctors, but like really understanding what type they have and working alongside a functional doctor, making sure the diagnoses are actually clear. Because I've actually had some clients who, quote unquote, were diagnosed with PCOS and we got blood work done and they did not have PCOS from what we saw, but we can't like undiagnose someone. So then we would send them to another doctor to get the undiagnosis, because they didn't have that. They just had estrogen dominance, which isn't PCOS, everybody. Like it's not the same thing. And you treat it completely differently. There's some layover, but like, you just told a woman she was diagnosed with something and you didn't actually run the testing to prove, are you fucking joking me? Like, and she had to go to a coach to look, you know what I'm saying? It's just bridge the gap. Like, I just feel like that's what a lot of us have to do as coaches, is we bridge the gap between health and optimal living with the Western med world. And it's like, can't we just like meet in the middle somewhere? Like, come on. And that's why functional doctors are like, yes, please find a functional doctor to help you to have more of that homeopathic natural approach, because that will help you a million times over versus just living in the Western med world, but then ultimately, again, just living a healthier life. But I went on a tangent, but either way, that's what inflammatory PCOS is.
Yes, but I mean, something that Christina and I talk about a lot is like when you're slapped with a diagnosis like that and you don't even know if that's really the case, it's like thinking about the repercussions of that. We talk about the psychology of the person when they're given a diagnosis. It changes. Like ultimately it changes the way you think about yourself and who you are. And sometimes our identity can be wrapped around it, and versus just treating them like a human being with some, you know, abnormalities that we're looking to correct. Right. And there's big differences there. And ultimately, like in some of these cases, like we can't avoid a diagnosis if they do have PCOS, but then it's like, how do we work with that? And maybe the helplessness that's induced, or the discouragement, or like the change in identity of like, I have PCOS. So now what does this mean about me and what I'm capable of, what I what I can do with my body and what I can't. And so that's like a whole other rabbit hole that you go down as a coach, because we're the ones dealing with psychology usually as well as hopefully a therapist, and hopefully they have the medical support too. But that's like, at that point, it's taking a village, and like, that's ultimately what it does take.
Yeah. And when you have something like that, when you're diagnosed, sometimes it creates lack of action because they feel like there's nothing they can do.
Yeah.
And that's not true. For all of you listening, that is not true at all. It might require a different approach, and that is totally okay. That doesn't even mean it's harder. It just might look different. And so to not let any type of diagnosis, whether it's hypothyroidism, Hashimoto's, whether it's PCOS, whatever it might be, don't let that hold you back from taking action. It just requires a different type of action, and that's okay.
Yeah.
What would you say, or how would you recommend? And sorry, son in the background is yelling. But because we've had similar situations with clients who are like menopausal, and they get that same reaction from their doctor, like, we're not going to run blood work because it's probably going to show XYZ. So, it's just going to be hard. If you have a provider, I know we've gotten some really awful messages lately. Like what would you say to someone who has a provider who maybe has that mentality of like, well, you probably have this, so we're not even going to run the blood work, or like, oh, you cannot lose weight because you have PCOS. Oh yeah, you need to do IVF because you have, whatever that mentality is. Like, what would you say to a client or just to someone, like, how can they advocate for themselves, or what should they do in that situation?
Sure. I think our first step as coaches when we have clients like that is to because the first thing we want to do is talk shit about that practitioner, right? At least I do. We want to throw them under the bus so bad and say how everything is wrong and blah, blah, blah. But I think the first step too, especially in building trust, because again, you have to remember a lot of people, they trust the doctor. When they say something like that, they're just like, okay, I guess this is it. So I think it's asking deeper questions of like, okay, so how did that make you feel? What are your thoughts on that? Do you think that's true? And just feeling out where they're at before, and I've just learned from experiences, before you just dive in on the hate train, and getting really curious so that they feel heard, and just giving them an actual space to be like, well, tell me what you think. Like, let's talk a little bit about your experience. Like, what did you say to them? Like, say it to me. And I just want to hear you really quick. Because a lot of women just feel dismissed, or they will express their experience about something and their doctor doesn't even ask any more questions. They just say, oh, no, let's just go on birth control. You'll be fine. Or we'll just do IVF. No big deal. 20 grand down the drain. It's fine. Or instead of just, working on, improving progesterone levels, let's just go straight to anyway. But that's where my brain goes. I'm like, or we can run labs and see your progesterone is, I don't know, like, let's see. But I think that just like opening up that space and just helping them feel heard and feel safe, and then asking permission to, okay, so I've heard you, and do you mind if I just give you my 2 cents on what I'm seeing right now between what you said and also the advice that was given to you by a practitioner? Is it okay if I give you my feedback on that? Just because, again, you're getting their permission. How many women actually get permission? You're asking permission for you to give me advice. No, they get unsolicited shit all the time. So I think the more safety you can create around that conversation, because she's already probably been dismissed. She probably feels stupid, right? Her doctor made her feel dumb for even asking, that type of thing. So the last thing we want to do is create that again. Yeah. So I think the safer you can make them feel, the more empowered you can make them feel, the more validated, like, what you're experiencing is true. Like, I hear you. And that's awful. And it's not normal. Just because it's common isn't normal. So, okay, here, and then you can ask permission. And then you can give your thoughts, just very transparent, very factual. Like, this is what I'm saying. This is what I think that might help you more. And just, again, what do you think about that? Like, just getting more question asking based versus telling, authority. You'll hold more authority as a coach if you just open space for them to feel like, oh, wow, they heard me and she gave a shit. Wow. I'm going to stick around and listen to my coach. Fuck what this doc says. And you didn't spend the time bashing what the doctor said, really. So I think that's the best way to go about it in those cases.
And most of the time, like we've had these situations when you ask the question, like, how did what the doctor say, like, make you feel about that? Like, it 9 times out of 10, like, the woman knows, like, she's like, yeah, it felt really like horrible. And like, he didn't really have much of a basis for what he was saying, or she, or whoever. And I still have a lot of questions, and I feel like I wasn't even really helped. And like, I don't even know like what to do here. Like, I'd rather take your advice. Like, that's usually where it goes, is like, they already have this distrust in the way that they were dismissed or spoken to because of just the nature of that conversation. And so usually even just that first question, like, how was that experience, is like the door opens. And I've had a number of times people just be like, yeah, I had a feeling you would be on a different page. And, you know,
my intuition tells me that something
Mhm.
is just not quite right here. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So tell us then, you mentioned, PCOS is not this death sentence for not being able to lose weight. It is possible. Tell us a little bit about what does that look like to bring something like that into remission and to keep it in remission, or is that even the right terminology to use? Or how do we quote unquote fix it?
Yeah, I don't even know if I would use remission or fix, but just manage is a good way, because each woman's experience is so different and the level of their experience is different, like you said, like a gradient. But one woman's PCOS experience could sometimes be like, oh, it's just annoying, versus devastating, and just such an extreme difference in how they feel. So your question was, what does that look like in terms of how you would get to managing it? Or can you kind of specify what that question was again?
Just kind of like either some examples of like how that is possible to, be able to manage it better, or potentially what it looks like in like a real setting. Like, what can someone expect if they are taking care of all the right things and working with all these practitioners in the right way, advocating for themselves and taking care of their health? Like, what can they typically expect in terms of reduction of symptoms?
Yeah. So I've had clients who okay, so I guess in one extreme, if like I've had a client who was literally did everything to a T. She was like one of those, like very type A, wasn't a victim, very growth minded, took everything as like a learning opportunity, like that type of woman. And she really worked so hard on managing her stress and like the nutrition side. She managed everything super well to the point where she didn't have symptoms at all anymore.
Wow.
But that was, again, she really honed in, right?
A plus. Yeah.
A plus student, right? Then if we look at maybe a woman who has a little bit more uncontrolled stress in her life, I would say stress is the biggest thing. Because again, the client I worked with, she had a lot of control in her career and her, family life was very calm. So the stress factor was a little bit easier for her to control. But what if we have someone who maybe they have PCOS, but they're a cop, right? Or a first
Oof.
responder,
Wow.
that type of thing, or a night shift nurse, like something where there's by default, there's going to be a higher level of stress. I feel like that type of woman, we might have to hone in more on the other things that we can control and just obviously learn how to self-regulate and make sure sleep is accounted for. But in that case, you can definitely see less symptoms for sure, but they just might pop up if you have a really high stress month. Your cycle might look a little different. And then you'll have months where everything feels like, wow, it doesn't even feel like this is a thing for me anymore. But then you add some stress on that and you'll notice some irregularity where we have to like jump in it again. So, but either way, it's absolutely worth pursuing and not just sitting back and saying, I have this thing, woe is me, right? Like even the smallest things, like you said, getting sunlight, getting steps in, is better than not doing anything at all. But I think each case from a PCOS place, your protocol and what is going to work the best for you is definitely going to be determined on your current lifestyle, what type of PCOS that you have, what the labs are actually saying, how severe are certain levels, if you want to call it that, off. so that we know how long, because if it's really severe, it will take longer, but you will feel so much better progressively along the way. So it's kind of hard to answer. It really just depends, if that makes sense. But I've definitely seen some women that they wouldn't even know that they had it unless the diagnosis was there. Right.
Yeah.
But, you know, stress is definitely the main indicator of how your progress is going to look.
Absolutely. No, I think that's a great answer. And it's like you said, it's also dependent on the work that you're putting into it and like how much you are controlling what you can control and working on yourself and that self-regulation piece. But I think that gives people a lot of empowerment and control in that process. And I think that's exactly what, you know, women need to hear is like, you have a hand in this. You're not just a victim to the diagnosis. Like, yes, that might be something that you live with for the rest of your life, but you can manage your symptoms to whatever degree, you know, you are capable of, and you're capable of a lot, probably a lot more than you think you are. So I think that's a very empowering message.
Yeah, absolutely. And get away from perfection, y'all. It's no one's hormonal like panel is ever going to be just perf. Like, remember too, our hormones, like they fluctuate throughout the day, throughout the weeks. So you could get labs 1 month and the next month, and quote unquote, you're doing everything right. And they could look a little different. And that's okay. So not shooting for perfection is also key. Just shooting for 1% better. And this feel like, and it could be like, what area do I want to make 1% better? Okay, I've been struggling with, you know, making sure I'm getting enough vegetables in my nutrition, or making sure I'm taking the right supplements for XYZ or whatever it is, being consistent. Just 1% better, y'all. Doesn't have to be like night and day. And in fact, it won't be night and day. It can't, like, perfectionism does not, it's not a thing, not a thing.
Yeah. I am sensing a trend here with how we talk about coaching and lifestyle, and it's all the same mentality that we need. So I think it's a good thing though, because it's like, we want an episode like this to be some magic answer, right? Of like, oh, maybe it's titled like PCOS solutions or whatever we're going to title it. I don't know. But like, people are going to tune in and be like, okay, this woman's going to tell me how I can magically snap my fingers and poof, it's gone. And then they hear the same thing that they hear us talk about on every other freaking episode of this podcast of one step at a time, focus on progress over perfection, all the cliche but true messages that we just repeat over and over again, because that's really what it's all about. So I appreciate you just validating that. But I feel like we could definitely make a part 2 or 3, but I do want to respect your time and make sure that we can wrap this up efficiently. So where can the people find you, and any shameless plugs that you want to throw in as well?
Oh, no shame, man. You can find me on Instagram. So just Alycia Israel, how my name's spelled. It'll be in the show notes, I'm sure. But I live on Instagram. That's really the only place I live. Find me there. I'm happy to like answer any questions. Feel free to DM me. I do answer DMs frequently. And shameless plug, my podcast, y'all, Be Your Own Daddy. If you want to learn like financial tips and just sometimes ranting, sometimes I will fucking have an episode where I'm just like, just rant, but it's good, right? Like we all need that shit sometimes. So any type of empowerment, like motivation, financial stuff, fight the patriarchy, like let's go. Like that's, if you're into that energy, then like by all means, like find me over there.
Awesome. All right. Well, Christina, you want to take us away?
Yeah, well, we love it. And thank you so much for being on. And guys, we hope that you enjoyed this episode. And if you haven't already, make sure you're subscribed to the podcast. You can find both of us on Instagram. You can find me at Christina Fit, and Marissa is at Marissa Roy Fitness. Thank you guys so much for listening, and we hope to see you back next week.